NFL draft rumors that are shifting the betting lines and shifting just kind of how we look at the NFL draft. This is Adam Chernoff with Right Angle Sports. All right, so the draft's happening in 4 days. All right. At this point now, it is an information game. How fast can you get the information before Wednesday when like the betting lines and all that go away? How fast can you get that in order to figure out where these players are being drafted? I like to talk about the betting lines, not just for betting purposes, but because it helps you cut through the BS. All right. It helps you cut through what's being said on First Take or whatever just for clicks. All right. If someone's like, yeah, I don't know, Tyler Shuck could go top 10. And then you look at the betting markets and he's like, minus 2,000 to not go in the first round. So, all right, that's just strictly rumors to try and drum up excitement. Okay, so that's why we really focus on the betting line to give us a truer sense of what rumors are actually valid. Okay, so we're going to listen to Adam here. We're going to talk along the way and see if he has any golden tidbits.
There's kind of an underlying, I don't want to call it an issue, but something that's holding everybody up, I would say, at the moment, which we talked about last week quite a bit. There is an overwhelming consensus in basically the top 7. And as all of these rumors started coming out this morning, I think there's validity to some of them. I do wonder how many of these are coming out in a way just to be different. The guys over at Underdog who have been doing amazing draft coverage, doing all this prospect work.
Yeah.
In the last, I would say like 2 to 3 days, it seems like their tone is switching just to be a little bit different. I think there's a real hesitation we're going to see this week of guys with their final mocks or their final commentary or the last thoughts or what I'm hearing that are going to be putting things out that are different from this consensus top 7 that everybody's kind of been locked into for the last 7 to 8 days.
Yeah, so we did a video on Friday or something of the top 10. And in there, we talked about, like, look, basically, the top 8 is done. Like, we know it's Ward, Hunter, Carter, Campbell, Graham, Genty, Membu, Walker. That's the top 8. Like, we know that's it. We know the top 8 is set. And now, all of a sudden, there's some real moving with a lot of that. I mean, I've heard within the last 12 hours, I've heard that the Raiders are Genty, and that is it. They have one name on their card. And then I've heard, well, they may actually go defensive lineman. And then I've heard, well, actually, Jacksonville might go Genty. And it's like, why the hell would Jacksonville go Genty? Wait, what? So right now we're seeing this shift with a few of those like set in stones.
It puts you at a decision as a bettor. Do you buy into this big like run of info? Because the only reason everybody got to this top 7 consensus is because there's a lot of info suggesting that these guys are going to go in this order, with the exception of maybe Mason Graham, who I still don't really understand how he got locked into 5. But it's like, do you buy into this, or do you buy into what's coming now because it's different and you're going against all these prices? It's kind of a decision to make. I don't know which side is right or wrong, but I do think you're kind of at a choice now. If you really haven't been betting the draft so far, do you kind of overpay for what's already been said, or do you just try pick spots that are against that consensus and probably inflated? I think that's the choice you're in right now as a bettor. So there's a choice to be made as we go through this, and keep that in mind, as some of this might be just coming out in the next few days with the intention to be a little bit different, more so than anything rooted against basically, I don't know, like 2 full weeks of pretty good info from reliable.
Well, like Jackson Dart, I think is a good example. I think we have like 2 solid weeks of Jackson Dart is not a top 10 consideration. He is a consideration at 20/21, but he's closer to a late first, early second than he is a top 10. But you still have this like reflection of, well, maybe it's either him or Shadour. But I currently subscribe to the argument that it's not what's happening. Like, there is not an actual discussion between possibly taking Jackson Dart at 9 overall.
Sources. So let's start off with Peter Schrager just because it's the quickest. It came out last night. He tweeted at 8:11 p.m. my time, 10:11 p.m. Eastern time. Having spent the entire weekend on the phones, here are
Schrager is super connected as well. Super connected.
2 names who'll go higher than where their consensus mock drafts have them going right now. Number
I haven't seen the article, but I guarantee you one is Mykel Williams.
1, Mykel Williams.
Yep.
Number 2, Colston Loveland.
Loveland, I think Loveland could go in the top 15. I really do. As far as why I said Mykel Williams is because he is flying up draft boards. I've seen his name in like the top 6. I've seen him being talked about with the Jets, with the Raiders, with the Jags, for a guy who was like, yeah, he's like 16, 17, 18, and all of a sudden it's like, nah, he's top 6, top 7, top 8. So, okay, something's going on here.
Plenty more to come this week. My mock goes up on Wednesday.
And let me talk about Mykel for a second, too. When we heard Shamar Stewart, Mike Green, like some of these fringe edge rushers who are very unpolished, very raw, very either small school or small production, but high upside. And you've got a guy in Mykel Williams who it's like, well, he's got the physical intangibles of not the RAS score and all that stuff, but he's got what you want like out of Shamar, and he's got the production of Mike Green, but he's doing it at Georgia. Right, so all of a sudden it's like, well, if he is flying up, it probably suppresses Mike Green and Shamar because teams would just rather take the more polished, more production, better school, all of that in Mykel Williams. All right, so I think that's why he's jumped up is those kind of fringe players because Shamar has been a top 10 guy, Mike Green's been a top 10 guy, and Mykel's been like 16. Well, if he's shooting up, it's because he's pushing them down. I think that's how we got to where Mykel is now consensus above those 2 guys.
So there are 2 names that stand out for guys that Peter Schrager, according to teams that he has phoned, according to teams that he has talked to, are expected to go higher. For all of the meaningful mocks, which are now getting, I would say, a little bit out of range, Mykel Williams has been as high as 8th, as low as 29th, which I think is silly at this point. We could rule that out. That's just a little bit dated. Lots of his trending number is around to the 13 to 15 range.
I agree.
For where he's going in the mocks. Colston Loveland is in that 17 to 19 range. That's where both of their prices have been. And
I think Loveland, you'll see him go to a team like we talked about, like, well, the Colts would love Tyler Warren. It's like, well, they're not going to get Tyler Warren. But I could also see them now saying, okay, well, if we can't get Tyler Warren, let's get Colston Loveland. And I think he'll fall somewhere at a team like that. And I think Mason Taylor from LSU could also find himself in the top, or not top 10, in the first round.
And that's kind of where we're seeing both of them as well. So 2 guys that Peter Schrager expects to go earlier than where they are in consensus mocks. Number 1, Mykel Williams. Number 2, Colston Loveland. If you've been watching the shows for 2 weeks, you probably have some ticket on a Colston Loveland under, probably at 19.5. He's now 17.5 with the under shaded to minus 450. So that is being bet under consistently, with that under moving in quite a bit.
Yeah, so it tells you he's going to go under 17. So you can go ahead but he's not going to go, see, Loveland's like, okay, he's not going to go top 10, but he's not going to go higher than 17. So then you take basically 11 through 17 and you find the spot, that's where he's going to go. So that's how you use information and betting markets and trends and all that to kind of identify who's going to take him. So go ahead and look at 11 through 17, look at who needs a tight end. That's where Loveland's going.
And then the biggest price of any position that hasn't changed position, Mykel Williams opened 15.5. That initial opening price at 15.5, the over was minus 130. The under at 15.5 is now minus 600.
Okay, so there you go. So super. What do you say? 13.5? I say. What do you say?
The under at 15.5.
15.5. Okay, so Mykel Williams' floor is 15. because of what he just said. Minus 600. That is insane money, insane steam. So you can go ahead and take Mykel Williams, and his range is, I don't want to give it, let's say 9, but his range probably is a little bit higher. But let's say 9 to 15 is his range. So now you figure out what teams in that range need his position. That's where he's going to go.
Is now minus 600. So as I'm saying, you kind of have to put yourself, if you haven't bet anything yet, you don't have any existing positions, you're saying, like, where are you going to go from here? You have to make the decision. Do you, like, really overpay? I wouldn't say to do that with either of these guys at these current prices, but are you willing to say that you're going to go against the consensus and take what could be an inflated price with so much uncertainty in the draft?
So I have two right now, and I'm going to have a lot more by the time the draft comes around. But right now I have two draft bets. I have the Saints taking at 9th overall, taking Tyler Warren at 9-1, and Mykel Williams at, I think it's 12-1 maybe. And this is how I would look at. I'll break it down like this. Like Mykel Williams, pretend you're playing roulette, and I tell you that ball is going to land in between the numbers of 9 and 15. Okay? So you know it has to be 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15. And let's say 13 is plus, it's 10-1. It's like, well, I have to bet that because I have this range, this very small range where he has to go. And within that range, you'll find these little pockets of like, well, why is that 10-1 or 11-1 or 12-1? Like if he has to fall in that range, like that's worth the value bet. That's how I look at it with Mykel with the Saints, where I don't really necessarily think the Saints are going to take him there, but if he has to fall in 5 or 6 picks and the Saints pseudo need the position, you almost have to make the bet. Like that's how I landed on betting Mykel. And same with Tyler Warren, where yeah, if Tyler Warren's on the board, he is absolutely a possibility for the Saints. And at 9-1, you got to take that.
You're seeing some pretty significant moves here in the last 48 hours on some of these guys. Let's move to the Adam Schefter article, which hit this morning. Last year, the Adam Schefter article had Michael Penix, number 8, to the Atlanta Falcons. It was the first time that was brought up. I think it's the first time that anybody saw that happened or mentioned or referenced anywhere. And that elevated what is always a very impactful article on these Monday mornings of draft week and kind of elevated it into, I want to say, a bit of legend status because of the prices that came with some of those Penix bets. Now, this morning, this came out around 6:10 a.m. Eastern time. So we are obviously a few hours removed. And things have definitely moved because there's a heightened focus on this Schefter article after what happened last year. The big name that was mentioned in this article that stood out as a big bet that you could potentially make was Ted McMillan going number 5 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That was 55-1 yesterday.
Insane range on Ted McMillan. So Adam Schefter's putting him at 5 to the Jags. I heard, now we're going to reverse engineer this. So he's saying McMillan at 5 to the Jags. Todd McShay said that he's got McMillan at 50, but he thinks the Jags are going to pass on Mason Graham to take a playmaker. And he thinks they're going to take Ashton Jeanty. So even though McShay has McMillan 45 spots worse than Schefter has him, they are aligned in the thinking of, well, Jacksonville is going to go playmaker. They're going to try and get this thing fixed for Trevor Lawrence, which makes sense. You got $300 million in this quarterback who has not given you anything. Keep helping him. You have to get a return out of that. So even though Mason Graham is awesome, it does make sense of, you know what, F it. Let's just roll with Brian Thomas and let's just roll with Ted McMillan and whatever. Let's just see if we can get anything out of Trevor Lawrence. Okay? So now I'm more inclined to believe, okay, McMillan might be going 5th. That does make sense, right? Just if you kind of look at it that way. Even though McShay is saying 50 and Schefter saying 5, you can take information from both and say, okay, makes sense. McMillan would, okay, I'm there. I can see it. All right, we're locked in. So I think this is a great idea. Now, you're not going to get 55-1, but even if you're not betting, let's say you're just not betting, you're not even worried about it, okay? Not worried about the betting market. Okay, well, what does this do for the Saints now? Mason Graham's fallen. Okay, so now McMillan goes 5. Let's say the Raiders still go Genty, which I think they would. Now, all of a sudden, you're at 7. And now you have the Jets, who's penciled in for an offensive lineman. And Mason Graham is on the board. If they stick with offensive linemen, Carolina's going to stick with Jalen Walker. That's their guy. They want Jalen Walker more than anybody. So now the Saints all of a sudden are looking at Mason Graham. And now things get a little gnarly, right? Because they probably would rather have Mason Graham than Mykel Williams. Okay? So I like that.
Clearly something from here got out, perhaps leaked a little bit, because yesterday, kind of out of nowhere, Tet McMillan went from 55-1 to 33-1 to go number 5 to the Jags. At that time, there wasn't a lot of news. There wasn't really anything published. I don't know how anyone maybe reasonably got to that consensus unless you knew that this was coming, which seems to be the case. It is draft week. You're going to have leaks. You're going to have things going a lot differently. And that now this morning is down to as low as, looking at the unabated odds screen, which is free if you want to look at it. The current price for him to go number 5, the best price available. As I scroll down to look at it, it was 12-1 before I came on air to be drafted number 5 overall. Currently, Tet McMillan is down to, well, there's 13-1 at FanDuel. There was 14-1 at DK. So you can still find some of those prices available. Again, are you willing to overpay a little bit, or is that going up a little bit too far?
By the way, I think you got to factor in, think about these articles, okay? If you are Adam Schefter or Daniel Jeremiah or Todd McShay or whatever, you are getting a ton of information. You don't want to just copy and paste the information, but you want to have 1 or 2 or 3 nuggets in there that make you look like a genius, because that's good for your brand, obviously. You don't want to just pretend like you have, I'm not saying ever cheat on a test, but you know how if you have the answer key to a test in school, you don't want to get 100 because 100 makes you look suspicious. So you might miss 1 or 2 on purpose. You're okay with a 95, 96. What are we doing here, right? That's how I think these guys are. They know they've got some information, but they can't tell, Adam Schefter can't come out with a report on Monday and nail all 32 picks, because the NFL would be pissed. Because then all of a sudden it's like, well, just watch Adam's report on Monday. You don't have to watch the draft, right? So he's got to layer in some misses. He's got to layer in some big dog wins. So think about that too when it comes to who's putting out the articles and what would benefit them, right? Think about it from their side
Birdie
as well.
He said McMillan fits Cohen and that Bucs setup. That is what MJD said in DJ's pod 2 weeks ago.
Another great point. Okay, you got Liam Cohen coming from Tampa to Jacksonville. Mike Evans and Tet McMillan have a pseudo comp, right? So, boom, again, makes perfect sense. Cohen knows how good, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin can be. So, Brian Thomas and Tet probably does sound pretty sweet.
I know you love that pod. I certainly was not ever connecting that comment to that. So good on you if you were able to spot that, Birdie. I know you've been on top of a lot of this. That could be one of them. So that stood out in the article. A couple other ones that stood out as well. Armand Membu looks like a top 10 pick or top 10 lock, with the Raiders number 6 and Jets number 7 being possible destinations. A pair of Texas players, offensive tackle Kelvin Banks and cornerback Jahdae Barron, have generated less talk than some other prospects at the positions, but both are in position to go higher than some people realize, with Banks being in play for Miami at number 13 and Barron being linked to the Jets at number 7. If Barron goes to the Jets at number 7, it would suck to lose that over, which is still at 18.5 with the over at -180. I know Evan Silva had Barron going number 5 to the Jags in his first mock last week. Now there's talk from Schefter with him going higher. This is all kind of coming in late after it was 2 weeks of Barron being a very highly rated guy, but teams having him in the 20s or later. So there's a bit of a divide there. It would be awfully unfortunate to lose that over with Barron going to the Jets. And then also being a Jets fan on top of that, knowing that the Jets very much probably overdrafted a corner in Barron with his skill set at that position. Do I like the fit now? They've extended Gardner. Okay. But with other options that would be available, that would be tough. What I would say.
Yeah. And that's something too, you got to look at, like, you know, I'm not saying, like, you kind of are at a divide there where you look at Barron and it's like, well, should blank team take him at 7 or 8 or 6 or whatever, 9? And you look at his over-unders like 18.5, and you're thinking, man, that is a jump. Like, that is a huge overreaction or a reach or whatever else. Kind of similar to Jackson Dart, where Jackson Dart's 21.5, I think, and you're talking about taking him in the top 10. It's like, yeah, that's a reach.
Say with Aaron Glenn and the connection that's being made to him and cornerback positions, that has been something that has been said almost every year that he's been with the Lions as well. I don't know where the Barron Jets ties come from. And I was surprised to see him 5 in Silva's mock as well. But that's now gaining a lot of steam this morning. Kelvin Banks is a guy we've talked about under 13.5 for a while now. He's getting more steam this morning. His current price at 13.5, under 13.5 is now minus 425. That opened up minus 175 last week. So lots of under money coming in on Kelvin Banks Jr.
So Banks, there's another one. So Banks' range now is 7 to 13. This is where he's going to go. So you got Membu and Banks basically both have to go from 7 to 13. So you can do the math, do your scatter plot, and you'll figure those two out.
Especially now with that Dolphins offensive line spot opening up last week.
With Tron Armstead retired.
Other commentary that I've seen in that article from Adam Schefter, Schweisinger, first round, yes, has been at plus 400. But there was commentary about him last week, which is where you start to see some of these differ and you start to see differences of opinion. As a linebacker, he was mentioned last week in a Athletic Football Show video where there was commentary about what guys are going to be doing in the second round and how guys are going to go further down the board. And he was mentioned specifically. As I pull this up, it's a big scramble to get through to everything and try to figure out where all the notes are with so much going on this morning. But there was specific commentary about him. He was viewed as a day 3 guy initially. And then what really kind of got this moving was on the Athletic show with Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler last week. They went further down the board and they were talking about day 2 guys, day 3 guys, and how everybody was potentially going to fall. He was mentioned as a likely top 50 pick. And that was the first time really anywhere in the whole draft news and draft intel kind of cycle that there were really ties to him being more than a day 3 guy. And so on April 16th at 10 in the morning, we go back 5 days, he was a top 50 pick. And now all of a sudden on Monday morning, he's being labeled as a possible first round pick. And so that is now at plus 400. Which has come in significantly from some of the prices that we were looking at last week as well for another linebacker to go in the first round. That does seem like a pretty drastic change. Trying to find fits for him down the board does seem a little bit difficult, but that is the current news as he's being linked to the Commanders at 29, which Birdie will not like because you've been on the running back to Washington train for a while, as well as the Bills at number 30. But it does seem like the Bills would go D-line or corner at 30. To me, anyway, who am I to overrule Schefter in this spot? But that's gaining a lot of attention here this morning. Let's get to the Todd McShay YouTube show. And there is some overlap that we are going to see in this.
Yeah, you're always going to see some overlap. And it's important to try and sparse through, like, what is the same, what is similar information, like just like the Ted McMillan thing. Even though Adam and Todd are vastly different on McMillan, there is similar information that Jacksonville is looking to add a playmaker.
to the Adam Schefter article. And so when you think about like the Peter Schrager tweet where he says he's been on the phones and he's talking to everybody, and then you see the Adam Schefter article, and then you see the Todd McShay show, you start to wonder if these guys are really kind of overlapping, talking to very similar people, getting fed the same info or the same story, right or wrong, because you start to see some overlap and some commentary that fall over. So in the Todd McShay show, which I want to say was probably recorded sometime over the weekend, he also has McMillan going number 5 to Jacksonville as a recent line of news that he has been hearing from the team. And specifically, he said there is a shift in information suggesting the Jaguars are now focusing on offensive skill players, with Tet being the first name mentioned. This would be a big change for Mason Graham, who's been mocked everywhere to go number 5 to the Jags. And so within the span of, if I go back 4 hours when the McShay show was posted, that was 5:14 local time, 4:15 local time, the Schefter article was posted. There's no way McShay was recording at the same time it was posted, so it wasn't like a follow-up because there were edits in the video. So I think both of these guys heard about the McMillan going 5 to Jag stuff over the weekend, and then both raced out to report it this morning, and that's where we're seeing a lot of that. Also in the Todd McShay show, there was a lot of commentary about how they do not expect Ashton Jeanty to go number 6 to the Las Vegas Raiders.
Which would be a huge shift. Huge.
And what was hard for me to decipher in the show specifically, and I couldn't tell, is was Jeanty expected to go earlier than 6, or were they suggesting that he was going to slide?
Now, okay, great point, because in that show, McShay does say Jeanty could go to Jacksonville, which, is nuts, right? Like, that changes everything. Same as if he goes to New England. If it's like, oh, yeah, he could go 4 to New England. It's like, okay, well, if that happens, like, these other, all of a sudden, Will Campbell's falling. Then all of a sudden, does that make Mimbu fall? Or does that make this player fall? Or, like, those kind of dominoes, you got to constantly be shifting and putting the puzzle together.
They didn't make sort of a direct reference to it, and it was hard to decipher a little bit. And so the adamant stance was that Jeanty was not going 6 to the Raiders. The other adamant stance that I heard on the McShay show this morning was that Will Campbell was believed by many around the league not to be worth that high of a pick.
Yeah.
Taking him at 4 for New England would be significant deviation from the idea of best player available. The last 3 to 4 days, going back to the later portion of last week, where a lot of guys starting to talk down Will Campbell and how the certainty around him going number 4 perhaps is a level too high for what it deserves to be. So all of a sudden, Will Campbell taking a bit of a detour and going back the other way from where he was rated so high in the draft.
Yeah, Campbell's interesting because we've talked about for a long time that Will Campbell's a guard. He's not a tackle. Like his in the NFL. And everyone pretty much agrees with that. But everyone has him mocked at 4 to the Patriots. It's like, well, why would they do that? You know, like if he's a guard and the Patriots are interested in, are the Patriots interested in playing him at guard, or are they set at playing him at tackle? Because if they are set at playing him at tackle, you would think there'd be more rumor or thought of, well, maybe they take Mimbu, or maybe they take Banks, or maybe they take one of these other tackles. Like, why is Campbell just guaranteed, no doubt about it, at 4? Right now, I know New England. There's been some reference earlier. There was reference to McMillan, and I think that's kind of cooled down. But I do agree, like the Will Campbell locked and set at 4 does seem kind of weird.
Which stands out and is a little bit interesting because just like Mason Graham at 5, just like Ashton Jeanty at 6, just like Armand Membu at 7, these picks have just been locked in for so long in addition to the top 3 that, again, I don't know if there's been like a fundamental change internally with some of these teams for these specific players. Perhaps they were over-reported in the 2 weeks prior. Perhaps now this is just talking in a different direction and reporting in a different way to have something stand out and is different. Just as Todd McShay said on his own show, there is so much narrow-mindedness of everybody getting to the same conclusion with the order of these picks.
Yeah.
So I start to...
Well, and that's what happens like with Mason Graham, where everyone just copy and paste Mason Graham at 5. But then it takes one line of thought of like, well, wouldn't it make sense for Liam Cohen to want to go in a different direction of offense or to help Trevor Lawrence and Ted McMillan and Mike Evans and blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, well, damn, that makes way more sense than Mason Graham, right? But you can't just do that in a vacuum because then it moves the whole board, a la Will Campbell. Does it make sense that the Patriots would not take Will Campbell? Yeah, 100%. Okay, well then who do they take? Do they still go offensive lineman? Because then does that skyrocket up another offensive lineman? It suppresses Campbell, but where's he fall? Right now, all of a sudden, it's like, would the Jets take Campbell? Would they rather him over Mimbu? If not, would the Saints take Campbell? Like, because then it's like, well, yeah, the Saints probably would like to have Will Campbell, but would they move him at guard? Then all of a sudden, who are the Saints passing up? Does that mean Warren is there at 10 for the Bears? Because the Bears would love to have Tyler Warren, right? Okay, well then who does that push down for the Bears? You know, like all this can't happen on its own. Whether, like, even though teams that don't seem like they would affect other teams, this kind of conversation affects the entire first round. So you got to really decipher what's going on here.
To look at the Todd McShay show and hearing those comments as, is he now trying to avoid being in that same camp of narrow-mindedness and kind of bring in different storylines?
Yeah. And
I didn't, in the Schefter article, see the same level of negativity around what we were seeing for Will Campbell. It certainly wasn't as overwhelming and strong as some of the other places that were making it, but this seemed to be more so McShay pushing that forward a little bit more. Not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying there was a bit of that stance taken. Now, for Shadour Sanders, there was commentary, initial buzz about New York Giants showing interest, but there is a conflict between personnel department and coaching staff, and it is believed that the coaching staff is more negative on Sanders than the personnel department.
Which is very interesting because you would think it'd be the other way around. But if the scouting department has the grade on Sanders to go 3rd overall, that says a lot. It also makes sense that Daboll wouldn't want to take a 3rd-string quarterback or a 2nd-string quarterback because his job's on the line. So he wants the best players available. He wants, give me Abdul Carter, give me, blank player, give me this guy because I'm trying to win. I've got Russell Wilson. I'm cool with that. I got to try and save my job. So yeah, Daboll probably doesn't want Shadour. But if the scouting department's like, hey, our grade is, because Abdul Carter is going to be there. So if the scouting department and the personnel group is telling you, we want Shadour Sanders, they are saying we would rather have Shadour than Abdul Carter. And it wasn't that long ago, Abdul Carter was the 1st overall pick, right? So that's a huge jump from the narrative that Shadour is maybe a 1st rounder, or the narrative he might go to Pittsburgh at 21. Now all of a sudden you've got a scouting department, now granted it's the Giants, but you got a scouting department saying, no, actually we think he should be 3rd overall.
Now department is higher on Sanders. Brian Daboll and the coaching staff is lower on Sanders. And what stood out was that his floor was mentioned at pick 21, now being softer, and there's a chance that he could fall past that. There was also commentary about how Brian Daboll specifically did not seem to rumored to be that high on Sanders at all. And if common sense would prevail, was the quote used, the Giants would take Abdul Carter at number 3, would certainly give them a very dominant defensive line if they're able to take Carter, who at one point was very much speculated to be the number 1 pick in the draft before combine injury and Cam Ward took over as the consensus number 1. So
another example of how, if the Giants take Sanders at 3, you would think the Patriots would just say, well, F it, we're taking Abdul Carter. Forget what we need. Forget all that stuff. We're taking Abdul Carter.
Sanders continues to fall. For the Saints specifically, I think that team is being viewed as the out for Sanders in the top 10.
Yeah.
But we're hearing now Saints very much rumored to be drafting or looking at defensive line players. There was a quote in the Todd McShay show that said New Orleans is not expected to take Sanders at 9 nor at 40, and they're considering Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, and Shamar Stewart. So if you were buying into the Sanders continues to fall hype that is continuing to grow in sentiment and strength, on FanDuel specifically, there is a market team to draft Shadour Sanders. The Saints are the favorite at plus 210. Browns plus 360. Steelers plus 400. Giants plus 410. Raiders 13-1. Jets 16-1. If you think the Saints are not going to draft him and you're buying into what is being said on the McShay show, and you're buying into even in the Schefter article as he's talking about Sanders and where he might end up falling, you're maybe not necessarily buying into what that looks like. And what I would say is, if you're thinking about the Saints with the new offensive coordinator hire and the connections to his son potentially next year, as well as Manning, there's kind of perhaps reason that the Saints are looking forward that might kind of help you buy into that Saints not drafting Sanders commentary. And
I don't think it has anything to do with Nussmeier and Arch Manning, especially if Arch isn't going to be in the draft. I also think like it's super lazy to be like, oh, well, Nussmeier's there, so he would want to take his son. It's like, well, would he? Like, would he want, or would that make you? If it was me, it would make me want to not take my son. You know, if I'm the offensive coordinator of a team, because then I'm thinking like, you know, am I going to be biased? Is it going to mess up his development? Having to listen to his offense coordinator, who's a father, would it be better off for him if he went somewhere else and could play just like, I know it sounds good, but in practice, I think, honestly, I think it's the opposite. And maybe that's just me, but I think it'd be better as a father to let your son go play for someone else versus like force him into playing under you. Like, it just seems weird, right? I know it's like Disney Channel sounds cool, like the dad drafts the son, whatever, but I just don't think that it's realistic. And the Arch thing, like I don't even think he's going to be in the draft next year. I think he's going to be in. I think he's going to stay at Texas for another season. So,
and rumors as well that are standing out. So if that continues to slide, you probably think that market on FanDuel is incorrect, with the Saints being the favorite, and you might be looking at Saints defensive line. I know I heard VR with Gill on Friday, if I'm getting my days right, talking about how he expects the Saints to go that direction. At the time that he mentioned it on the show with Gill, that was around 6-1, I believe is what he said in price. Defensive line edge is now 3-1 at DraftKings, with that continuing to come in further.
All right, so this is where we took a stance, and this is where you find a little bit of arbitrage, where right now the betting favorite for the Saints is defensive line edge on FanDuel, which is what Adam's referencing. Quarterback is still the favorite on MGM. I haven't checked all the markets, but let's just talk about FanDuel. If defensive line, so here's the arbitrage. Defensive line edge is the favorite position for the Saints to draft at 9. But the top 2 players to be drafted by the Saints are Shadour Sanders and Jackson Dart. Those two obviously can't be true. So you have to decide which one is right. Is it Shadour and Jackson Dart, aka quarterback, is the favorite for the Saints to draft, or defensive line / edge, that's what I'm thinking. So if you go with defensive line edge, you have to remove Shadour and Jackson Dart. That then gets you on the betting board to Shamar, Mykel Williams, and Jalen Walker. If you assume Jalen Walker goes 8, it gets you to Mykel Williams and Shamar. So then you decide, who do you think the Saints would take over Shamar and Mykel Williams, which is what led us to betting Mykel Williams at 13-1 or whatever it was when we kind of deduced all that. So that's the street I'm taking, is I think the Saints go, if Jalen Walker's there, they're going Jalen Walker, but I don't think he's going to be there. So I think they go Mykel Williams.
Other comments that were mentioned as I talk about some crossover between McShay and Schefter this morning. Jade Barron mentioned as a guide to watch for the Jets at 7. My goodness. If that happens, both guys this morning seem to think that there's a chance that it will. James Pierce and Mike.
But if Barron goes 7 and Membu falls, does that force the Saints' hand? Where all of a sudden now it's like, man, we weren't even thinking about taking this guy because we didn't think he'd be there. He's there. Do we just take best player available? And do we figure this out with Trevor Penning? Do we take Membu and say, hey, you're playing right tackle, Penning, figure it out at left guard?
Mike Green mentioned with Atlanta and Cincinnati.
Because as much as Michael Williams is sweet, for the Saints, if you're looking at Talise Fuaga on the left and Armand Membu on the right, and Eric McCoy at center, you're thinking, damn, we're pretty close to having a really, 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 really good offensive line who's also really, really, really young. So for Kellen Moore, who's coming off of watching what the Eagles did with a good offensive line, that is certainly attractive.
Teams that are looking to target defensive line and edge rushers, where there's expected to be a run between pick 7 and pick 17, include the Jets, Panthers, Saints, Falcons, and Bengals. 5 teams targeting edge rushers. Certainly buy into Panthers.
Yeah, you basically you can guarantee Panthers, Falcons are taking defense and probably edge rusher. So slash line. I mean, edge is such a weird term. Like it's so weird now, but just say defender. Panthers, Falcons for sure are taking defensive players.
Absolutely. Talked about that in the newsletter a couple weeks ago. Starting to buy into the hype. Falcons, that goes back to the draft and combine with the commentary that was sent out on the newsletter and how they were looking as a goal this year in the draft to boost their position at edge rusher and be better at rushing the quarterback. And then the Bengals with Al Golden coming in, certainly looking to draft younger defensive players.
We know the Bengals situation. They are, I think they're the team that has spent the least amount of money on the defensive side of the ball. They just paid Higgins and Chase. We know now that the only way that they can boost that defense is by getting younger and winning in the draft. So they're going to take, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals took all defensive players because they're so desperate to get impact players on the cheap on that side of the ball.
Earlier in the draft with a big position of need, especially if you think Trey Hendrickson moves on, that would be edge rusher and defensive line as well. So those were 5 different teams. And you think about the positional totals and the impact that would have, that continues to get bet over as well for defensive line edge rushers to go in the first round. That price every morning creeps up a little bit higher. Handful of comments before we get to the Daniel Jeremiah mock with Mina Kimes. As I take a sip of coffee, we got a new coffee machine. We got the full espresso setup.
All right, let's
so it is a lovely Monday to the Daniel Jeremiah mock with Mina Kimes.
All right, now this mock is a little weird because Mina presents 2 players, and then you have to pick from those 2 players. So it's not a true mock. What is, I guess, kind of worth it is Daniel Jeremiah's like off to the side comments. Like for the Saints, Mina gave Daniel Jeremiah Shadour Sanders or Jackson Dart. But if you believe that they're not going to take either player, then it doesn't really matter. Now, what matters is if Daniel says some off the side comment of like, well, if I could choose between blank players, this is who I would take.
So this is not Daniel Jeremiah's Wednesday mock where on the conference call on Friday, he said his final mock is going to be what he's hearing from all of the teams and based on the intel that he is gathering, not what he is projecting.
So that's what that's Daniel Jeremiah's like fine. We certainly will cover that.
Happen or what he would think is interesting, like he did with the first 2. Yeah. Peter Schrager's comes out Wednesday as well.
Yeah.
I think Matt Miller said his final one is Wednesday too. But in this video, which to me looks like it was recorded over the weekend based on some of his takes, he was presented with that exact question. If you're New England at number 4, are you drafting Campbell or are you drafting Ashton Jeanty? And he said that he was put in a bind by that question because he's taking a guy in Jeanty who he has rated higher than Campbell. But if he was in the Patriots position, he would be taking Campbell at number 4 over Jeanty to bolster the offensive line and continue to build that team, as he thinks Jeanty going into that scenario isn't quite going into a scenario that's fit and built out for him to succeed. So this isn't, again, a mock format that's traditional for what Daniel Jeremiah does.
Now, if you're New England, again, like if you're Mike Vrabel and you have Drake May and you had all that success with Derrick Henry, does it behoove the Patriots to take Ashton Jeanty? And all of a sudden then, Jeanty's going 4. What do the Raiders do? Where does Campbell go? A lot's happening. But it does kind of make sense. You would want to say, you know what? Give me Drake May and Ashton Jeanty, and we will figure out the rest for the next couple of years. Give me those guys, and we'll keep it moving.
Has guests on the show, and she goes through what are the common.
Now, what could be crazy is Sanders goes 3, Jeanty goes 4. Now you've got Abdul Carter sliding and Will Campbell sliding.
Scenarios. So that's a good example. Jeanty at 4, real or wrong. And then she gets opinions to say basically yes or no and take the common guy or go the different direction. For what it is worth, as we stand here on Monday morning, the order of players that Jeremiah had were Ward, Hunter, Carter, Campbell, Graham, Jeanty, Membu, Walker, Sanders, Warren in the top 10. He did not deviate too far from this consensus that has really been kind of locked in for the last 2+ weeks.
But Mina is also giving him the consensus. She's using the consensus to create her 2 options for Jeremiah. So she kind of doesn't allow him to deviate too much from the consensus.
So while Schefter is reporting and going a different way with some stuff that I think is very valid and worthwhile, especially given the track record of that article, with McShay going the other way as well, you have this video, however serious it might be, is up to your discretion to determine, but you have at least Daniel Jeremiah sticking with this consensus.
I would throw this video out and I would focus on Jeremiah's mock on Wednesday. For example, if Jeremiah mocks Campbell 4, I would take that as gospel because he's pretty much heard, like, look, they're taking Will Campbell. The Patriots aren't doing whatever. Even though he might say, I would take Jeanty, right? If he's got Mason Graham 5 on Wednesday, I wouldn't probably worry about the Ted McMillan stuff. Now, if he's got McMillan 5 or if he's got Jeanty 4, I'd go ahead and I'd pretty close to lock that in.
Top range of guys that everybody kind of seems to be veering just slightly away from. He's staying put and rooted in what we've seen. Now, things that stand out to me from the other picks that he gave in that mock with Mina, Matthew Golden, number 12 to the Dallas Cowboys, wide receiver like number 1 off of the board. Colston Loveland, number 14 to the
Colts. I think I said that earlier. That's a great landing spot for him. That's a team that wants Warren, can't get Warren. The Colts have talked about tight ends recently. I think it might have been, I can't remember who was giving the interview, but he talked about how much they miss Jack Doyle. So if you miss Jack Doyle, Jesus, you're definitely drafting a tight end. So Colston Loveland to Indy at 14, I think is pretty solid.
Colts, tight end number 2 off the board, but well under any of his posted prices. Jahdae Barron, number 11 to the 49ers. All the excitement that I had rooted in those early comments about Barron seemed to be dying a very slow death, unfortunately. Mike Green going to the Bengals. Jahad Campbell going to the Falcons. Michael Williams falling to the Buccaneers. What a win for Todd Bowles that would be. Marion Hampton, 20 to the Denver Broncos. Ezeraku, perhaps buying into those combine videos where Ezeraku was just pumped to talk about the Packers and Jeff Hafley and the connection and how he's already had talks with Green Bay, yet Ezeraku going to the Packers. And then at the end, he had Trey Amos, who's a first-round candidate and a guy that was mentioned in the press conference on Friday as jumping up draft boards in a big way and being a first-round guy that is expected to go day one. We saw his price to go first in the first round drop, but he is still at plus 145. He had Amos going to the Bills on the back end. Birdie, he unfortunately had Washington taking Ibuka, the wide receiver. That would be wide receiver number 3 in the round. He had the Chiefs going O-line with Simmons, and he had the Eagles taking a very underrated guard in Tyler Booker, pick number 32 overall.
Yeah, so I mean, like, and this kind of helps you too with mock drafts if you're still doing mock drafts. But if you're taking some of these guys in like the second or third round that are being mocked to go in the top 30, it's like, well, they're probably not going to be there. Like what they're saying here, and you can inverse that too, where if you're like, well, Josh Simmons should go 9th overall. It's like, okay, well, he's being mocked around 30, like for whatever reason, whether you think that's right or wrong. Like now you got to kind of plug these players into where they actually are. Same with Mason Taylor. Like I think if you mocked on PFF, Taylor's probably still available in the 3rd. He's not going to be there. He's probably going to be a first-round pick.
Overall. So that is how DJ saw or at least played out the Mina Kimes show over the weekend. Last batch of rumors, Matt Miller, NFL draft scout, he went on a bit of a post-tear last night as the wife and I were sitting down to watch TV, got the notification, picked it up. Okay, here we go with Miller. Dropped him in the footballbetters.com telegram. Matt Miller specifically says, talking to teams, the positions that are going to fly off the board day one are offensive tackle. Poor depth after the top 4 to 5 was the reason. Tight ends are going to fly off of the board. Safe picks in uneven class. Defensive ends are going to fly off the board 6 at least in round 1. Cornerbacks, back half of round 1 run, big drop off to 2nd tier. There was a comment from Coach Mike Sanford as the top comment. Not running backs, ? Matt Miller said Genty will go. Hampton will go round 1. But I'm hearing more teams are willing to wait than not because of the depth.
Yeah, running back is super, super, super deep
on day 2. So take that for what it's worth from NFL draft scout Matt Miller. Offensive tackle, tight end, defensive end with at least 6, and then quarterback.
That all makes sense.
Back half of round 1 on a run. So if you are getting into perhaps betting the draft live with some of the in-play props, as you get towards the back half of the first round, if some of those corners start to slide, you're probably going to see their value increase. Tight ends expected to go early. Offensive tackles expected to go early. Defensive ends expected to go early as well. The Hef, back for another show. Good to see you. Let's have some fun, he says.
All right, there you go. Now he's going to get into the comments, so we'll skip there. Okay, a lot of this, like I said, we are out of the player evaluation part of the mock draft. We are in the information part. So for the next 72 hours until basically Wednesday night, it's all information all the time. What are teams saying? What are scouts saying? What are insiders saying? It is no longer who's got the best catch radius. It is no longer who's got the biggest hands. It is no longer the broad jump this or broad jump that. It is what are actual teams saying. So we're going to keep reporting. We're going to keep updating. If you are betting, if you are trying to bet this, I would say, bet. Try and find the value. Don't bet blank player under blank position minus 600. Try and find the guys where it's like, all right, maybe they're like kind of like Michael Williams, where, okay, if you narrow the scope with the information, it kind of lines up with, even with like the Patriots. Okay, don't bet Will Campbell to go to the Patriots minus 280. Bet where if you narrow the scope, it's like, well, if they don't go Will Campbell, it could be Ashton Genty 10-1 or Membu, whatever his number is. Like you start narrowing that scope, and then all you got to do is hit 1 or 2, and you're good to go. For example, if you bet Michael Williams to the Saints, Tyler Warren to the Saints, and Tevin McMillan to the Jaguars, you bet one of them, you're home free. Or you win one of them, you're home free. You don't have to hit all of them, right? So I love it, man. Love it, love it, love it. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.